every name of a Gurkha character in the book comes from a real man who received a military award for bravery.
I mean, one of the extraordinary things about the Gurkhas is their ability to fight and their ability to put up with all sorts of terrible stuff in combat that lots of other people from around the world would naturally balk at.
Hello. The Gurkhas are soldiers from Nepal and northern India and have fought in the Indian and British armies since 1857. During the Second World War, they made up around 1/3 of the Indian Army regiments, and 26 Gurkhas have won the Victoria Cross, the highest award for valour. Joining me today are two guests to talk about the Gurkha story in a new book, The Jungle War. Hannah Watson is the author, and Robert Lyman, the historian of the war in the Far East, provides some historical perspective. The foreword of the book is written by Hari Budar Magar, Gurkha veteran of the war in Afghanistan, and in 2023 the first double above-knee amputee to summit Everest. I've put links in the show notes for those who want to find out more about this great cause. Plenty more great history to come, including the ancient Greeks, Max Hastings, interwar espionage, and French collaborators. Please do share with the like-minded, and if you can give a gentle review, I'll be in your debt. But until then, it's Hannah Watson, Robert Lyman, and myself on the Gurkhas and the Jungle War. Hannah Watson, Rob Lyman, welcome to Hannah. Welcome back, Rob. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's great fun being back with you to talk about the Jungle War.
Good stuff. Okay, so yes, listeners, we have Hannah on because she's written this wonderful book that's doing very well, and it is called The Jungle War: The Second World War Adventures of Lieutenant Jim Chance. And this is a book aimed at kids, and I know from my podcast statistics, I have listeners on here who are not kids. The vast majority have kids, though, because, well, I'm assuming
Fantastic.
they do because they're of that age. So I have to confess, my listenership is majority a certain demographic, which I won't go into in any more detail for fear of accidentally insulting some people. So we have a good audience for this. This is for birthdays, Christmas presents, stocking fillers. But Hannah, I wanted to start by asking, this is written in association with the Gurkha Museum. So this is very much a Gurkha book, who are, I think you can fill me in, but I think they are a group of soldiers from Nepal. And the book, its genesis, I think, is with the Gurkha Museum. But Hannah, I wanted to ask how you came up with the idea for the book.
Thank you so much, Ollie. And I was nodding along to all of that, which obviously your listeners can't tell. But just to circle back to the age range, we like to say that's for adventurers of all ages as well. So I have on good authority that people have enjoyed it from probably about the age of 7.5 right up to people in their 60s and beyond. So yes, for children, for grandchildren. Yes, so the project. So I really arrived at this project by chance, by good fortune, because it wasn't my idea at all. As you say, the project was sort of launched by the Gurkha Museum, but actually came first of all via the Gurkha Welfare Trust, which people may have heard of. It's a wonderful charity that supports the needs of originally Gurkha veterans who had served and well, even still now, but sort of now has moved into looking after development projects more generally, also in Nepal. And it was a major donor of the Gurkha Welfare Trust, Mrs. Mary Rose Cooney, who had obviously been interested in this cause for a long while, been interested in the Gurkhas. And it was through her own personal connection and through her grandson and understanding or realizing that he really had no knowledge of this period of the war at all, that the whole book idea came about. And I've got Mary Rose's grandfather's name here. He was Arthur Longhurst, and he served in the, I want to get this right, I think it's within a Gurkha regiment, even during the First World War, and had been part of the building of Mamio, which is a town that features within the book. And so Mary Rose kind of had all of that sense of the history and the personal connection through her grandfather. But then in speaking to her grandson, realised that none of that was getting passed down. And people like to talk about the forgotten army. and the Indian Army, and she realized, this is still in danger of being forgotten by that generation. And I have lots of experience working in children's publishing and writing books for Usborne Publishing. And so they found me, and I thought it sounded great. And I was one of those people that didn't know the story. And so I kind of came along on the adventure with everyone else. So yeah, it's really a really fun project to get involved with.
Okay, and then so the story itself, is that based on Mary Rose's
Her grandfather.
Yeah.
No, it's not. When we were thinking about, I keep saying we because we formed a little working team and that we affectionately called the BBC, which was the Burma Book Club before we came up with the Jungle War. But I should talk about I. So I wanted the book to be sort of jokingly called it a work of faction. So the events are all grounded in the history. So the battle scenes are as real as they can be. All the places are real. The key kind of army officers and generals and things like that you'll meet, Ord Wingate and Bill Slim and Jackie Smythe and all of those people. But the main characters to give that freedom are kind of works of the imagination. So you have Jim, who is the 18-year-old who we first meet on the rugby pitch in England, and his father works on the railways in India. So you have that link that as the Second World War rages on in Europe, Jim is sent back to his father, kind of ostensibly to safety, and little do they know, obviously, everything that's going to play out in the East. And then you have a Gurkha character called Taman, who is able to kind of represent that whole side of the story. But in Jim and Taman, I did quite a lot of reading around accounts from British officers, which was obviously a little bit easier for Jim because we have those written records. So two accounts that were really great that I'd recommend people who've not come across them. It's A Hell of a Licking by James Lunt and A Child at Arms by Patrick Davis. And these are wonderful for being able to build that character of Jim around some things that had happened to those men. And for Taman, it was a little bit trickier because, in terms of Gurkha tradition, those men weren't sort of rushing home to write memoirs about what they'd seen and experienced. But there was a brilliant book called Gurkhas at War by J.P. Cross and his adoptive son, Budiman Gurung. And they had gone and interviewed Gurkha veterans of the Burma campaign, the ones who survived. And they had a few oral accounts from men who spoke often for the first time about their experiences. And so Taman was able to be a bit of a composite of some of the things that were shared that way. And stop me if I'm going on too long, but
I'm very interested in that.
Yeah,
I'm very interested in that. So I was wondering if we could delve into that. So when you were reading about these sort of accounts from Gurkha soldiers, what was were there overriding themes? And did they? I always assume, I'm sure wrongly, the British that were sort of the officers. I'm right in saying that? Does this come out in the memoirs? Are they sort of, who are these bloody British officers going around telling us what to do? We're perfectly good at soldiering ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting because even though this is a wonderful resource, it was only probably a collection of stories from a collection of men. So I'm very hesitant to say, oh no, everyone felt like this or that. But in terms of themes that they were able to draw out, I think a lot of the men were just sort of very stoic and very practical and sort of just very, that there's a war I've been asked to fight in it. Either they were already soldiers or sort of were recruited and then told, there's this army that you've got to fight, but not really given any context to what they were going to go and do, but sort of just, I think quite kind of took it on the chin of, right, well, we're here to do a job and say, let's do it. And I think approached quite a lot of the war in that way. And I think, so JP Cross, who's still alive and well in Nepal, and it was wonderful because we were able to strike up an email correspondence, him and and I was able to sort of check some things against his own recollections because he himself had fought in the latter part of the Burma campaign, which is just mind-boggling but incredible, and that he's still able to email me back and forth to talk about it even this year.
How old is he now? I hope he doesn't feel insulted by my asking.
He's turning 100 this year.
He's 100 this year.
Wow.
JPX. Just a couple of things about the Gurkhas. I mean, they have a very long tradition of selling their manpower out of Nepal, and a very long tradition of serving in the Indian Army, and now after 1947 with the British Army as well. So certainly the professional soldiers at the start of war, and then the large number of recruits from Nepal into both the Indian Army regiments and Gurkha regiments in the Indian Army. These men knew what they were entering, and they were loyal and professional and committed and fought remarkably well. I mean, one of the extraordinary things about the Gurkhas is their ability to fight and their ability to put up with all sorts of terrible stuff in combat that lots of other people from around the world would naturally balk at. And that's the exciting thing about the story. I think we were asking the Gurkhas to do an enormous amount in the face of Japanese invasion, an enemy they hadn't faced before, we hadn't faced before, amidst a whole series of remarkable challenges in 1942 and 43. And they did it, as you'll discover when you read the book, almost smiling. You know, this was one of the characteristics of the Gurkha commitment to their profession. They did it uncomplainingly.
Mm. And actually, to piggyback onto that, so when it came to naming the characters in the book, I also wanted to make sure I chose names that were, accurate and kind of did justice to those characters. And so I went back to the Gurkha Museum's archives, and every name of a Gurkha character in the book comes from a real man who received a military award for bravery. And so that's just a nice little link that people who sort of enjoy that type of thing can go back and link characters, and they're not sort of based exactly on they don't kind of enact the things that the real men received awards for, but it was nice to think of the real men that they're based on, and then to read these incredible accounts of the immensely brave things that they did, kind of single-handedly holding off the enemy or throwing themselves in front of people to protect their men and to protect other troops and things like that. So that was a nice connection there, and to be able to tap into the Gurkha Museum's archives and resources as well was obviously amazing.
And what was the sense of the Gurkhas of themselves? Because the reason I ask is that nowadays they are very much I would say an elite level of soldiers in the British Army. Was that always the case? How did they view themselves? Was this sort of very much, we are among the premier regiments in the British Army?
I don't know, Rob, do you want to step in there?
I don't think they would have regarded themselves as elite. I think they regarded themselves as ultra professional. They were disciplined. They were hardy fighters. They put up with an enormous amount of challenge uncomplainingly. They marched faster and harder and carried greater weights than other units, perhaps. But they also created fantastically close relationships between officers and men. This was again a feature of the Indian Army. And but I think the standout, it's very difficult to generalize, but you would like to be able to describe the Gurkha regiments as being the epitome of military professionalism, and certainly the way in which they conducted themselves through the Second World War, both in Europe, so the Mediterranean and Italy, but primarily in India and Burma, was exactly as you would hope well-trained professional soldiers to behave. And which is one of the reasons why the story is so compelling, and why they're such an important part of our military history.
To add to that, just if I sort of reflect on the reading of the British memoirs, I just think they're so different because we've inherited with kind of our British culture this sense of the sort of pathos of war, and it being so much feeling and emotion, and the kind of wider context, and the men are writing with kind of that zoomed out perspective and kind of the weight of the Great War before them, and all of the kind of literature that came out of that. And I think they're writing with that big sense of being part of something, kind of in a literary tradition, whereas the kind of oral accounts, I think they're just much more grounded in the practicality of, I was given this job to do and I did it, and often very proudly, like, I did it well. And some of the men had walked for hundreds of miles to meet JPX and Budiman Gurung, and to say, I'm here to tell my story for the first time in 50 years or what have you. And there's a wonderful account of a man who turned up with all of his medals because he wanted to demonstrate, look, I'm here and this is what I did. And another account of a man who I think had been very conscious that he hadn't passed on a message or hadn't quite fulfilled an order, and for him it was a huge sense of relief that he'd met in the form of JPX, the kind of he regarded as like a commanding officer, to be able to kind of finally fulfill his duty. And so I think there's just much more of a sense of I'm here to do my duty. I'm not messing around. It's very practically minded, and yeah, not, I suppose it's just very different. Someone kind of orally sharing their story as opposed to kind of a book that's been labored over and someone's been able to write with the whole kind of context of war literature behind them.
I see, yeah. And so Hannah, tell us about the plot of the novel. We got Jim. So what is the story?
Yes.
But no spoilers.
No spoilers. Okay. It's always funny with with a book that's kind of based on history as well. Like, well, for me, lots of it would have been spoiled because for me, lots of it was new to discover. But being for children, I think we wanted to start in familiar territory and to ground the book in things that they might know and their kind of history that they would be aware of the war in Europe. So you meet Jim, and he's, I think, 17 and 3/4 years old, and he's on the rugby pitch at his boarding school in the UK. And he's a boy, and his main thought is whether he's going to be the one to score the first rugby match of the new season's winning try. And this all gets interrupted by the headmaster, who appears on the sidelines with his mum, and Jim suddenly realizes something's very wrong. Why is mum here? And she's there to share the news that their house has been bombed in the Blitz. And so I think we're in January 1941, and this whole event kind of splits the family up. So the mum and the sister go to stay with family, and Jim's sent, as they think, to safety in India to go and stay with his dad. And he's sent by boat on a passenger liner. They have to sort of take the long way round. And it's on the boat that he's chaperoned by a family friend, Major Blanding, who sort of acts as a bit of a foil. Major Blanding's obviously a major in the Indian Army and has served with the Gurkhas, and tells Jim lots of tales about these really amazing, fearsome warriors. And of course, by the time Jim arrives in India, he wants to sign up, much to his parents' maybe not dismay, but sort of sense of, oh dear, they know much better than him what he's getting into. And that kind of really kickstarts everything, because then Jim signs up. He goes off to be trained up, and of course then the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and they realize not only have they been sort of training for the wrong type of war, but they're fighting an enemy that they didn't expect to fight, in a context that is totally kind of alien and hostile, and so threatening, in the form of the jungles of Burma. And Jim's kind of thrown into this situation, and the book takes you through 1942 and 1943.
It's extraordinary, really, thinking about this, as you say that Jim is wrenched from his school, and he's a child, based officially, 17 and 3/4, and I guess a year later, or less than a year later, he's in the army. And
yes.
Commanding men.
Yes.
So you find that? How did you find that to write about? Because that was, I guess, quite a frequent occurrence in the Second World War. But for us now, that's quite alien, really, isn't it? Obviously we've got young officers, but not that many at such a young age.
Oh, totally.
And Rob can talk about how small our army as well is. So it's there are very few of these officers around today.
Oh, and with them, all the talk about bringing back national service.
Exactly.
At the forefront of people's minds. But yeah, it's such an interesting dynamic. And I think, Rob, it's true that the officers serving in the Indian Army as emergency commission officers tended to be younger than officers fighting in other parts of the war. So to have Jim represent that young, inexperienced boy, kind of very rapidly forced to behave and become a man, that worked really well. And to have Taman, who's actually 10 years older as a character than him, was a nice dynamic, because Taman's a lot more experienced, and Jim will have to learn from his men and really step up to lead them. So that was a fun narrative arc. But yeah, for me, writing about it, I mean, I was talking to my mum, and she said, Hannah, I can't really bear to think about it, because I just think about your brother. So I've got a younger brother, and she said, it's agonizing to think about him being that age, going off to war. But I suppose we've got a war in Europe at the moment, and so it's not kind of unthinkable that something like that could happen again. I had a son just at the end of last year, and so thinking about that as well, having a little boy, he just kind of brings it all to the forefront of your mind.
It's worth just saying, if I can interrupt, that actually, yes, so the ages are absolutely right. Young officers were going off to officer training school. at age 18, at the same time that soldiers were joining the army. But that didn't change. That actually still hasn't changed. When I was commissioned into the army, I was 18 and I was commanding soldiers in combat when I was 19. It's only changed in the last 20 years, perhaps, as more officers go to university first and then go to Sandhurst afterwards. Otherwise, the reality is right. We were very dependent on lots of young men with their energy and enthusiasm and self-belief and fitness to carry the war, frankly. And if he hadn't volunteered when he had got to India, there would have been no conscription in India, but certainly if he'd stayed in England or in the UK, he would have been conscripted later in the war. So he wouldn't have managed to get away from it. But it's in the nature of young men that they generally want to join up and fight. And I think the interesting thing here is that Jim joined the Gurkhas before the Japanese invasion of Southeast Asia in December 1941. So he was in training as an officer. The war was a very long way away. And at the time, the Indian army was going to war in the Mediterranean, North Africa, Eritrea, North Africa. And in 1941, it was serving in Iraq and Iran as well. So that, a life of huge military excitement awaited Jim. But then, of course, the unexpected happened and the Japanese arrived and the world was turned upside down. But he wouldn't have been alone as a young 18-year-old. Most army officers brought in as ECOs, emergency commission officers. Well, I say most. There was a whole range. People came in at middle age as well, but a large number came in very young.
And what was the oldest you could be commissioned in, actually, just out of interest, personal interest?
There was no real age limit. It was probably early 50s. Men were coming in to do administrative jobs and functions that weren't required in combat at a much older age. For combat, of course, you want people as young as possible because they're fit and so on. That physical fitness, fighting is a young man's game, and the younger you are and the fitter you are, the better it is.
But early 50s, Max. There's a hope for podcast producers then, I suppose, if there is ever
it's very
needed.
Well, listening to the Battleground podcast with Saul David is quite extraordinary. In Ukraine, large numbers of people at 50 and over are in the Ukrainian armed forces now.
They're in that stage where they're desperate for men. So, Hannah, there's a very interesting foreword written by a very distinguished mountaineer and Gurkha vet, and that's Harry Buddha Magar. I hope I've pronounced that right. Tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful to have Harry on board, and I also hope I'm pronouncing his name well enough. I think he'd forgive us. But yeah, so Harry is long-standing kind of ambassador for the Gurkha Museum and the Gurkha Welfare Trust causes, and I think so well regarded within that community. And it was great to have him write the foreword. I say to people, buy it for the foreword alone, just because I suppose everyone wonders how they would react in war. And I think part of the reason we love war stories and we're so compelled by them is because you think, goodness, what would I be like in battle? And it exposes that whole range of human emotion. And Harry, someone who has fought, knows what that's like. So Harry lost his legs in Afghanistan and is able to, write about serving from that perspective and overcoming, all kinds of challenges that are, just unthinkable, but also from the perspective of having that personal connection. So he talks about his wife's grandfather, who's Naik Jaspir Pun, who fought and was captured by the Japanese in Burma as well. And he survived, but he's very conscious about all those Gurkha soldiers who didn't. He also writes about the fact that, this is for young boys and girls of his own children's age, that he would like them to know what, a little bit about what it was like for his wife's grandfather. So it's great to have him be able to talk from all those levels that I couldn't speak about at all, not being a veteran and not having gone through all of what Harry's been through. And he just continues to inspire people and amaze people. I think he had a world record breaking ascent of Everest, I think last year, where he became the first W amputee to make it to the summit, which is just incredible. So a very remarkable man. And there's a couple of copies floating around with his signature and with a note from Dame Joanna Lumley, who we're very fortunate to have as our other sort of supporter of the book, which has been really, really wonderful.
Absolutely. It's a star-studded book, really. And I guess we're running out of time, but I just had a question a little bit more on because Harry mentions in the forward, there's I think around 10,000 Gurkha casualties during that campaign. I'm fascinated to know the numbers who actually served. It's 10,000 casualties suggests it's quite a lot.
Yes, well, there were 10 regiments of Gurkhas serving in the Indian Army, 29 regiments in the Indian Army, 10 of which were Gurkha, which is quite extraordinary. Because there are such a large number of Gurkhas, you would expect a higher proportion of casualties sort of across the army, and that's largely the case. Wherever there was fighting in Burma from 42 through to 45, you had Gurkhas and the casualties, which include those who are killed, wounded, and taken prisoner. That's what the casualty number includes. Was very high, and that's the reason for it.
So Hannah, what are your plans for the book? Are you touring festivals, being gala dinners?
Well, in fact, yes, we are. The Jungle War will be at the Chalk Valley History Festival. I'm not sure quite when this is coming out, but yes, hoping to do a talk at the children's tent there, which would be really good fun. And I think we're just trying to go to events wherever possible. So there's plans in the works for me to do an event at the Ark, which is I think a kind of art centre in Winchester, which would be great. And I know Piers, who I mentioned earlier, who's been doing a lot of the wonderful coordination, has been speaking to some other kind of contacts around, specific Gurkha regiment events and things like that throughout the rest of the year. So yeah, it'd be really great to keep bringing the Jungle War to new audiences, particularly sharing it with kids, because I know it's such a great story, and war stories appeal to all ages, that it is great to keep talking about it with adults, but it'll be super fun to share it with some children and do some activities around kind of storyboarding and talking about those type of things.
We will be at the We Have Ways Festival in July. Well, certainly the book will be there. And I just want to say, when I was asked to come in and read the book and give my view on its historical accuracy, I was blown away by it. This, in my view, isn't just a book for children. This is a book that anyone who wants to really understand the first few years of the Burma campaign and they want to do it quickly, this is a book to read. It's absolutely fabulous. It's fast-paced. It's historically on the button. Hannah, as a newbie to this world, has done an absolutely amazing job, and it's very exciting to see it. And I'm not at all surprised that Harry and Dame Joanna Lumley and everybody's got on board to endorse it, because it really is very exciting. It's very rare to find children's books that are so engaging and exciting, and this really does deserve to do very, very well.
Yeah, it's got great little info panels throughout the book to update you on where the campaign's going. It's very good. I actually gave it to my nephew for his birthday. I haven't received the thank you letter yet, so if he's listening, I am aware.
Probably too busy buried in the adventure. I don't know.
I suppose so. Yes, he must have. He must be reading it many, many times over. It's taken that long to give. Fantastic stuff, Hannah.
I keep saying we just because I think of this idea being such a collaborative project with Mary Rose, whose idea it was, and so yeah, it's just been a huge pleasure and a privilege to get involved in the world and to make so many friends. And it's a really fun and friendly world, the world of everyone connected with Gurkhas and with that little pocket of military history. And so if you're new to it, to jump on in, because yeah, it's really fun, and it's a whole exciting world to get to know. And yes, as Rob said, please do go and buy a copy, because proceeds from the book go back to some really good causes. So back to the Gurkha Museum, to the Gurkha Welfare Trust, and to the Kohima Educational Trust, which supports educational projects in India. So yeah, you're doing good on many different levels when you go out and get a copy. And you can buy copies very easily. It's available on Amazon, and I think if you have Prime, it will be with you in a day. So yeah, super easy to do.
Yes, and for a good cause too.
Well, a final point, if I may, do buy the book, because if we can sell enough copies, we'll commission Hannah to go and write the sequel. Remember, this book only finishes in 1943 with young Lieutenant Jim Chance as a Chindit in the middle of Burma. And we've got a couple of years of war to follow. We've got 1944 and 1945, and Hannah needs to write those stories in due course.
Great stuff.
What better motivation?
Indeed. So the listeners know what to do. Hannah, Rob, thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Been good to be on again.
Thanks very much for listening. Links are in the show notes, and if you're heading to the Chalk History Festival or the We Have Ways Fest, then do say hi to Hannah. But in the meantime, thank you and good night.